A story about loss, resilience, and the unexpected weight of second chances. But she lost everything on a Tuesday. Her company, her home, the life she had bled for across a decade, stripped down to auction numbers and strangers' hands, picking through what remained. Claire Hawthorne sat in her wheelchair at the edge of her own front lawn and watched 200 people treat her life like a yard sale. And then one little girl pointed at a battered drafting table in the corner of the tent and said it looked lonely. And the man standing beside that little girl paid $215 for it without knowing he had just bought his way into Claire's future. If this kind of story moves you, the kind that crawls under your skin and stays there, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. We tell stories here that don't let go. Drop a comment below and tell us the city and country where you're watching from. We genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. And if you're already feeling something, leave a like before we even get started. It means more than you know. Now, let's go back to that Tuesday. The morning the auction happened, the temperature in Briar Ridge had dropped overnight without warning, the way autumn sometimes did in that part of the country. No gradual fade, just a hard, cold snap that arrived between midnight and 5 a.m. and left frost on car hoods and porch steps by morning. By 7:30, the auction company had already set up folding tables across Claire Hawthorne's front lawn, arranging her furniture and belongings into clusters with small white price tags dangling from drawer handles and lamp cords, and the legs of chairs she had bought at different points across a decade of her life. Claire watched from the end of the driveway. She had positioned her wheelchair far enough back that she wasn't technically in anyone's way, but close enough that she could see everything clearly. She had decided the night before that she would watch the whole thing. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because looking away felt like a kind of defeat she wasn't ready to accept, even now. Maybe because some stubborn part of her needed to witness it, needed to burn the image in so she couldn't ever romanticize what had happened to her, couldn't sand it down into something softer than it actually was. The accident had taken her legs 18 months ago. A structural failure on a renovation site, a site her company had subcontracted, a contractor she had trusted, a morning she had decided at the last minute to visit in person because something about the permit timeline hadn't sat right with her. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her own professional instinct had put her in the exact wrong place at the exact wrong time. She had survived. The worker standing next to her had not. That fact had lived inside her chest ever since, like something lodged and unremovable. The surgeons had told her within the first week that the spinal damage was permanent. She had listened to that word, permanent, with a strange calm that the hospital staff seemed to find either admirable or deeply concerning. She could never quite tell which. What she hadn't told them, what she hadn't told anyone, was that in those first weeks she had been less afraid of the wheelchair than of what she suspected was coming next. And she had been right to suspect it. Within 6 months, the contract started quietly redirecting. Clients who had seemed loyal for years began citing restructuring needs and shifting project timelines. Her business partner, Marcus Hale, had managed the company during her recovery with the calm efficiency of a man who had already decided what the outcome would be. By month 8, she had learned, through a paralegal friend, not through Marcus himself, that 2 of her 3 major accounts had been transitioned to a firm Marcus had quietly incorporated 3 months after her accident. She had confronted him. He had sat across from her in a conference room with his hands folded on the table and explained with the particular smoothness of a man who had rehearsed the conversation that the company had needed stable leadership and that he had acted in the best interest of their clients. He used the phrase operational continuity 4 times. He never raised his voice. He never said anything that could be characterized cleanly as cruel. That had somehow been the worst part. The legal fight had taken what remained of her savings and 8 additional months of her life. The settlement gave her a cash figure that sounded significant until her attorney walked her through what it actually covered: legal fees, medical debt from the accident, and enough left over to rent a modest, accessible apartment on Sycamore Street for approximately 14 months, if she was careful. The house? Her house. The Victorian on Caldwell Avenue that she had bought at 26 and renovated over 5 years with her own design work and a rotating cast of weekend contractors she had managed herself, went to the settlement estate. And so the auction. You doing okay? She turned. One of the auction company staff, a young woman with a clipboard and a fleece jacket that said Harrison Estate Services across the back, was looking at her with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite managing it. I'm fine, Claire said. We can set you up closer to the house if you'd... I'm fine here. Thank you. The woman nodded and moved off. Claire pulled her jacket tighter and looked back at the lawn. There were maybe 60 or 70 people moving through the setup now, which would grow to over 150 by the time the auction formally opened at 9. She recognized no one. That was by design. She had told herself she would not invite anyone, would not accept company, would do this alone and cleanly. Her friend Dana had called 4 times yesterday and twice this morning. Claire had let all 6 calls go to voicemail. She watched a man in a North Face jacket lift one of her dining chairs and flip it upside down to examine the underside. She watched a couple debate quietly over her kitchen island stools. She watched a teenager take a photo of her vintage drafting lamp and show it to his mother. The drafting table was near the back of the setup, partially obscured by a wardrobe that had been placed awkwardly in front of it. It was old. Genuinely old, not the kind of old that got called vintage and marked up. The surface was pale oak, scarred with pencil grooves and the ghost impressions of hundreds of traced lines. One of the legs had been repaired with a slightly different wood stain that didn't quite match. The auction tag on it said $200. It had been the first serious piece of furniture she had ever bought for herself at 24, secondhand from an older architect who was retiring. She had done every early sketch for what became Hawthorne Design Group on that table, had worked on it late into countless nights with bad coffee and worse lighting in her first apartment, drafting the kinds of designs she'd been told were too ambitious for a woman without a decade of firm experience behind her. She had expected the table to go early. It did not. By 10 a.m., the wardrobe in front of it had sold. The table was now fully visible, and still nobody paused at it for more than a few seconds. A man in his 40s glanced at it, checked the tag, and moved on. 2 women walked past it discussing a set of lamps. The table sat in the cold morning with its scratched surface and its mismatched leg and its $200 price tag and was completely, thoroughly ignored. Claire realized she had been holding her jaw tight for the last 20 minutes. She made herself relax it. Ethan Brooks had not planned to attend an estate auction that morning. He had planned to spend the morning on the phone with his accountant, which was the kind of thing he had been dreading all week, in the specific way you dread a conversation you already know is going to go badly. But his accountant had rescheduled at 7:15 via text. Something came up. Can we do Thursday? And Lily had been awake since 5:30 with the bright, uncontainable energy of a 7-year-old on a day off school, and he had made the mistake of showing her the auction listing online because he had thought briefly that it might be a way to find a second-hand office desk for the Brooks construction site trailer at a price that wasn't going to make him wince. Can we go? Lily had said immediately. It's an estate auction, bud. It's not really... What's an estate auction? It's when someone sells a lot of their stuff. Lily had thought about this for a moment. Why? And Ethan had paused, because the honest answer, because sometimes people's lives fall apart, and they have to, was not a 7 a.m. explanation for a 7-year-old. So he had said, different reasons, and Lily had accepted this with the easy flexibility of a child who had learned not to push on certain kinds of answers, and 40 minutes later, they were in his truck heading toward Caldwell Avenue. Lily was wearing her green corduroy jacket and had her hair in 2 uneven braids because Ethan had done them himself, and he still hadn't gotten good at it despite 2 years of trying. She had a small backpack with her, even though there was no reason to bring a backpack to an auction, but she had insisted, citing a logic that had something to do with being prepared, and he hadn't had the energy to argue about it. The auction was already busy by the time they arrived. Ethan moved through the crowd with Lily's hand in his, scanning price tags with the particular focus of a man working a strict mental budget. He found 2 folding chairs he didn't need, a shop light that was tempting but ultimately impractical, and a set of drafting rulers still in their original case that he picked up and carried for a while before setting back down. Lily said very little. She moved with him, looking at things with an expression of careful consideration that he found quietly amusing. She approached the auction with the same seriousness she applied to most things, which was one of the traits he both loved and occasionally worried about in her. She was a child who paid attention, and sometimes paying that much attention at 7 was a heavy thing to carry. They had made their way toward the back of the setup when Lily stopped. The drafting table was the only item in that section that hadn't moved. Everything around it had been bid on or carried off. It sat by itself on the frost-softened grass with its scratched surface catching the flat morning light. Lily looked at it for a long moment. "Dad?" "Yeah." "That table looks lonely." Ethan glanced at it. The price tag. The scuffed legs. The surface that told the history of actual use rather than display. He thought about the desk situation in the trailer. He thought about the $200 tag and what his accountant was going to say on Thursday. He thought about the fact that it was a solid piece of furniture and that solid things were increasingly rare at prices under $200. "It does look a little lonely," he said. "We should get it." "We don't really need a table like that, Lilybug." She looked up at him with an expression that was not quite a plea and not quite a verdict, but somewhere between the two. "It's been there the whole time. Nobody wanted it." He looked at the table again. He thought about the way his daughter processed the world. The way she noticed things being overlooked and felt it personally, in some way he had never quite been able to explain and had stopped trying to. She had been doing it since she was 4, since before her mother died, and it had become more pronounced afterward, as if some part of her had decided that noticing things was a form of protection. $200, he said. "It's a good table," Lily said. "You can tell." When the bidding opened on it, Ethan raised his hand at 200. A woman across the setup raised at 210 without looking particularly invested. He went to 215. She didn't counter. The table was his for $215. He was arranging the logistics of transport, mentally calculating whether it would fit in the truck bed without the tailgate, when someone spoke from his left. "That's an interesting choice." He turned. The woman in the wheelchair was maybe 30, dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested function over intention, wearing a jacket that was slightly too light for the temperature. She was looking at the drafting table with an expression he couldn't immediately read. Not hostile, not warm, something more complicated than either. "Is it?" he said. "Most people walked right past it." She paused. "Your daughter said something about it." He looked down at Lily, who was now examining the mismatched leg with apparent fascination. "She said it looked lonely." The woman was quiet for a moment. "That's a kind way to see an old table." "She sees things like that." He extended his hand. "Ethan Brooks." She looked at his hand briefly, then shook it. Her grip was direct. "Claire Hawthorne." Something shifted across her face when she said it, a small tightening around the eyes, like she was still deciding how she felt about her own name in this particular context. "You were watching the auction," he said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation, but he saw her register it. "It was my house," she said. Flat, factual, not inviting sympathy. He didn't offer any. "I'm sorry," felt wrong, too easy, too reflexive. And so he didn't say it. Instead he said, "Is the table something you'd rather have kept?" She looked at him. It seemed to catch her off guard, the directness of it. "Yes," she said, "but I tagged it at 200 because I assumed no one would want it anyway, and I didn't want it to go to storage." "How long did you have it?" "Since I was 24. She looked at the surface, at the pencil grooves and ghost marks. "I drafted the plans for my first 5 commercial contracts on it. Then it did good work." She said nothing. Lily had stood up from examining the leg and was now standing beside the table with her hand resting lightly on the surface, not touching it so much as acknowledging it. She looked up at Claire with the open appraisal of a child who had not yet learned that staring was impolite. "Are you the one who owned all this stuff?" Lily asked. "Lily," Ethan started. "It's fine," Claire said. She looked at Lily steadily. "Yes, this was my house. Where are you going to live?" "I have an apartment on Sycamore Street." Lily seemed to consider this. "Is it nice?" "It's accessible," Claire said, and something in the way she said it made Ethan think it was not a description she had chosen so much as one she had accepted. "Our house has a ramp," Lily said. Dad built it because our neighbor Mrs. Okafor hurt her knee last year. He builds things. Claire looked at Ethan. Construction, he said. Residential and light commercial. Lily told me, she said dryly. A brief, quiet, almost smile crossed her face. Not warm exactly, but present. The auction noise continued around them. A pair of men were loading Claire's kitchen island onto a flatbed truck 20 feet away. Ethan noticed Claire watching them and noticed that she stopped watching when she caught herself. The way you caught yourself picking at something that was going to leave a mark. I should let you handle the logistics, she said, and started to turn her chair. Ms. Hawthorne. She stopped. For what it's worth, he said. I'll take care of it. The table. She looked back at him for a moment. The expression on her face was impossible to fully catalog. Something between skepticism and something older than skepticism. Something that had been skepticism so long it had started to calcify. It's a drafting table, she said. It doesn't need care. Most things people say that about do, he said. She was quiet again. Lily had gone back to examining the leg, crouching down with her backpack shifting on her shoulders, apparently satisfied that the adults were done with the conversation. Good luck with your construction business, Mr. Brooks, Claire said finally. Ethan. A pause. Good luck, Ethan. She turned and moved toward the driveway. He watched her navigate the frost-patched grass, the way she adjusted her angle for the uneven ground with a kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of hundreds of such adjustments, a constant small negotiation with a world that was not designed with her in mind. She did not look back. Lily stood up and came to stand beside him. She was nice, Lily said. Ethan watched Claire reach the sidewalk and turn down Caldwell Avenue without stopping. I think she was trying not to be, he said. Lily thought about this for approximately 2 seconds. That's kind of the same thing. He looked down at his daughter, at her uneven braids and her too serious expression and the small hand that had found its way into his without either of them quite deciding it. Help me figure out how to fit this in the truck, he said. Lily brightened immediately. I have measurements in my backpack. You measured the truck bed before we left? I measured the truck bed before we left, she confirmed. He stared at her. She looked back at him with the patient expression of someone who had done the preparation and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. How? He said. Are you 7 years old? Lily grinned, the quick, unguarded grin that she saved for moments when she thought she'd been particularly clever, the grin that looked so much like her mother's that it still hit him somewhere in the chest every time he saw it. I just am, she said. He picked up one end of the table. Get the other side. I'm 7. Supervisory role. Talk me through the angles. She scrambled around to the other end anyway, placed her small hands on the edge with great seriousness, and they navigated the $215 drafting table through the thinning crowd together, his daughter coaching him through the turns in a voice of considerable authority, while across town Claire Hawthorne pushed herself down a sidewalk she knew by heart for the last time, and the frost on the grass of her old front lawn caught the late morning light, and then, slowly, began to melt. 3 weeks after the auction, the drafting table sat in the corner of Ethan's site trailer with a piece of plywood balanced across it, because there was nowhere else to put the plywood, and the careful promise he had made to himself about giving it a proper place had not yet materialized between the estimates and the permit paperwork and the school pickups and the general ongoing chaos of running a small construction business as a single father in a city that seemed to generate bureaucratic obstacles the way other cities generated weather. The table was there, though. He noticed it every morning when he unlocked the trailer. That counted for something. The Millbrook contract was supposed to be the job that stabilized everything. 14 months of work, a mixed-use commercial and residential development on the east side of Briar Ridge, the kind of project that a company the size of Brooks Construction only landed once every several years if they were doing things right and the timing was favorable and they hadn't done anything recently to make the wrong people unhappy. Ethan had won the bid in August by undercutting 2 larger firms on price while matching them on timeline, a calculation that left almost no margin for error and required everything to proceed more or less as planned. Nothing proceeded as planned. The first inspection came back in October with 17 flagged items, which was not unusual for a project at that phase. 14 of them were standard corrections, minor framing issues, a drainage slope that needed adjustment, a subcontractor's electrical work that had to be partially redone. 3 of them were not standard. 3 of them had to do with accessibility, and they were the kind of accessibility citations that didn't get resolved with a correction order and a reinspection date. They required a fundamental redesign of the building's entry sequence, its internal circulation paths, and the relationship between the parking structure and the primary lobby, changes that touched almost every other design decision downstream. Ethan read the inspection report 3 times at the kitchen table after Lily was in bed, the house quiet around him in the particular way that houses got quiet after a child went to sleep. A different quality of silence than the kind that existed before they were born, fuller somehow, weighted with the presence of someone you were responsible for. He read it a 3rd time and then set it down and sat there for a while. His architect on the project was a competent man named Gerard, who had done good work on 2 previous jobs for Ethan, and who called him the following morning with the specific exhausted register of someone who had already spent the night researching the problem and had not found an easy answer. The ADA compliance issues run deeper than the entry sequence, Gerard said. Whoever approved the original drawings missed a series of cumulative errors. The turning radius calculations for the accessible units are wrong. The accessible route from the parking level has a grade change that exceeds allowable slope by 4%. And the lobby configuration creates a path of travel obstruction under the 2010 standards that the original design just didn't account for. "Can you fix it?" Ethan asked. A pause. "I can fix individual elements, but what they're asking for is essentially a circulation redesign, and that touches the structural grid in 2 places. To do it right, to do it in a way that doesn't create new problems in 6 months, you'd want someone who specializes in this. Someone who does accessibility architecture specifically, not as a checklist item." "Do you know someone?" Another pause, slightly different in quality. "There's a name I keep seeing in these kinds of situations. I've never worked with her directly because she's been unavailable for the last year or so. But she was the person people called before that. Claire Hawthorne. She ran her own firm for a while. I heard she settled a legal dispute recently and might be taking independent work again." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You know her?" Gerard asked, reading the silence correctly. "We've met once," Ethan said. He found her number through a professional directory that still listed Hawthorne Design Group, which no longer existed, but included a direct contact number that rang through to a cell. He held the phone for almost a full minute before dialing, which was not something he normally did. He was not, as a general rule, a man who hesitated on phone calls. He made several dozen of them a day in the normal course of business and had developed the kind of practiced directness that came from years of dealing with contractors, city inspectors, suppliers, and clients simultaneously, none of whom responded well to uncertainty. He hesitated on this one. He wasn't entirely sure why. Some part of it was professional. Asking someone to consult on your failing project required a particular kind of humility that he had not yet fully made peace with. Some part of it was the memory of her face at the auction, the way she had watched her kitchen island loaded onto a stranger's truck, and then caught herself watching and looked away. He wasn't sure exactly what he was walking into. He dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hawthorne." "Claire, it's Ethan Brooks. We met at the—" "I know who you are," she said. Not unkind, just efficient. "What do you need?" He told her. He described the Millbrook project, the inspection findings, the circulation redesign problem, Gerard's assessment. He tried to be complete without being theatrical about it, because he had a sense that she would respond better to information than to urgency. He was right. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough in his experience that he noticed it. When he finished, there was a silence of approximately 4 seconds, which he'd learned was a thinking silence rather than a negative one. "Send me the original drawings and the inspection report," she said. "I'll look at them." "I can bring them to you." "You can send them digitally, which is faster and doesn't require either of us to arrange anything." He almost pointed out that he would have been happy to arrange it, but he understood without quite articulating it to himself that she was drawing a boundary around the terms of her involvement and that respecting that was more important than the gesture. "I'll send them today," he said. "I haven't said yes yet," she said. "I know. I'm sending them so you have what you need to decide." Another brief pause. "Fine, send them." She responded at 11:30 that night with a message that read, "The inspection team was right. Your architect is also right. Individual fixes won't hold. I've looked at the original drawings, and there are cascading issues that the original designer didn't catch because they weren't thinking about circulation holistically. I can help. My rate is $185 per hour. I need access to the site. I need your original structural drawings in addition to what you sent. And I need you to understand that the solution I recommend may require you to push back on your general contractor timeline in ways that will not be comfortable. If you can agree to those terms, we can talk." He read the message sitting on the couch at midnight, Lily long asleep down the hall, the house carrying its nighttime silence around him. He read it twice and then typed back, "Agreed on all terms. When can you come to the site?" Her response came 4 minutes later. "Thursday at 9. Send me the address." She arrived 7 minutes early, which Ethan noted not because he was checking, but because he happened to be at the trailer window when her car pulled in. It was a modified vehicle. Hand controls, he assumed, though he didn't look closely enough to confirm. A dark blue sedan that was practical and slightly dented on the rear passenger quarter panel. She transferred to her wheelchair with the economical precision of someone who had done it 10,000 times and did not need an audience for it, which was why he turned back to his coffee before she got halfway across the lot. When he opened the trailer door, she was already at the portable ramp he'd set up the previous afternoon. She looked at it briefly, tested the edge with her front wheels, and came up without comment. He had spent 45 minutes on that ramp the previous afternoon, reading specifications online and then adjusting the angle twice. He had not mentioned it, and she did not mention it, and he thought they were both better served by that. She got straight to it. The original drawings were spread across the plywood-topped drafting table, which she recognized without acknowledging, a flicker of something crossing her face that she closed off quickly. And she moved through them with a red pen in her hand, marking observations in the margins with handwriting that was small and precise and entirely illegible to Ethan from across the table. "Your entry sequence has 3 separate grade transitions in 40 feet, she said, not looking up. That's what the inspector flagged. The inspector flagged the grade. What they didn't flag is that even if you correct the grade, your turning diameter at the first vestibule entrance is 48 inches clear. ADA requires 60 for a power chair. So you fix the ramp and you still fail." She marked something. "Your architect missed it because he was looking at elements individually. The problem is systemic. Can it be fixed without tearing out the vestibule?" She considered for a moment, pen still moving. "Possibly. Depends on what's load-bearing in the adjacent wall. Do you have the structural engineer's drawings from the original design?" "I had them sent this morning. Should be in your email." She pulled out her phone, checked, and looked back at the drawing without comment. "I'll need to walk the site." "It's active," he said. "Crews on the upper floors, but the lobby level and parking structure are accessible." She looked up at him directly for the first time since arriving, a quick evaluating look that had nothing soft in it. "Accessible," she said. He heard the word land differently than he'd intended it. "Navigable," he corrected. Something very small shifted in her expression. Not exactly a smile, but in that direction. "I know what you meant," she said. "Show me the lobby." He had worried, privately, about the site walk. The parking structure's accessible route was one of the cited violations, which meant navigating a path that was demonstrably not up to standard, a particular irony that he had not been sure how to address. He had ultimately decided that trying to prepare her for it, or apologize for it in advance, would be more condescending than just letting her navigate it and deal with what she encountered. She hit the grade problem at almost exactly the point where the inspection report had cited it, a section where the path transitioned from the parking level to the lobby, access corridor, and the slope exceeded code by that 4% margin Gerard had mentioned. She stopped, pulled a small digital inclinometer out of her jacket pocket, measured, noted the number. "Who approved this slope?" she asked. "The original civil engineer, apparently. It's in the civil drawings as a grade transition that the architectural drawings show as flat. So no one caught the discrepancy." No one caught it. She took a photograph and moved on without editorial comment, which he was beginning to understand was her baseline mode of operation. Observe, document, assess, and reserve judgment for the report rather than the moment. He found it easier to work alongside than he'd expected. He had worked with consultants who narrated every problem with the energy of someone personally aggrieved by it, and that particular style of engagement was exhausting over a full site walk. They spent 2 hours on the lobby level and parking structure. At one point, Ethan's site foreman, a broad-shouldered man named Calvin who had been with Brooks Construction for 6 years, appeared at the lobby entrance with a question about the second-floor framing schedule, and Ethan dealt with it in 4 minutes while Claire continued making notes without apparent interest in the interruption. When Ethan rejoined her, she was measuring the vestibule width with a laser distance tool and frowning at the number it gave her. 51.5, she said. Still short. 60 is the requirement, yes, I know. That's why I'm frowning. She lowered the tool and looked at the adjacent wall. This wall. Is it on the structural grid? I'd have to check the drawings. Check the drawings, she said, because if it's non-load-bearing, we can relocate it 8 inches to the east and solve the turning radius problem without touching the structural system. Which means we're looking at a partition relocation instead of a structural modification, and that's a very different conversation in terms of cost and timeline. Ethan looked at the wall. He looked at the drawings in his hand, oriented himself in the plan, traced the grid lines. It's not on a column line, he said. It's infill. She looked at him with an expression that was the closest thing to enthusiasm he had seen from her. It was not a large expression. It was the expression of someone who had trained themselves to be careful about hope. But it was there. Then we might have a solution, she said. A real one, not a patch. How long to develop it? Give me a week on the drawings, maybe 10 days. My window before the project timeline collapses is about 3 weeks. Then you'll have your solution in 10 days, she said. Stop worrying about the timeline for now and focus on the structural drawings. I need them confirmed by tomorrow. He had the structural drawings in her email by 7 that evening. The following 2 weeks established a rhythm that neither of them had planned and neither of them commented on. She worked from her apartment on Sycamore Street, which she had referenced as accessible, in a tone that Ethan now understood meant functional rather than pleasant. He had not seen it. She had not offered him the opportunity to, and he had not asked. Their working relationship existed in the site trailer, on the site itself, and in a running thread of emails and occasional phone calls that happened at irregular hours, because both of them, it turned out, worked on the same kind of schedule, which was to say, whatever hours the work required, which was frequently late. She called at 8:45 on a Wednesday evening while he was washing dishes from dinner. The structural drawings confirm the infill wall theory, she said, without preamble. I've drafted a revised entry sequence that relocates 3 partition walls, adjusts the vestibule geometry, and corrects the grade transition in the parking access corridor with a reconfigured landing. It doesn't touch any load-bearing elements. He stopped washing the dish in his hand. That's clean. It's not clean, it's complicated, and it'll require your framing crew to demo and rebuild 2 sections they've already completed. But it's solvable without triggering a structural permit, which keeps you inside your existing approval. Claire. What? This is good news. A brief pause. It's a solution, she said. Whether it's good news depends on whether your framing contractor can hit the revised schedule. He can. Calvin's crew is solid. He set the dish down and leaned against the counter. How much time did this take you? Why does that matter? Because I want to make sure your hours are accurate when you invoice me. My hours are always accurate. A beat. It was about 60 hours over 10 days. I'll send the invoice with the drawings. Send the drawings first. The invoice will take care of itself. That's a strange thing to say to someone you're paying for a professional service. It means I trust that the invoice will be fair, and I'm more interested in seeing the drawings right now. She was quiet for a moment. Not the thinking kind of quiet this time. Something different. I'll send them tonight, she said. The drawings arrived at 10:17. He opened them on his laptop at the kitchen table, shut. Full revised plans, clean and precise, annotated with the specific corrections in a format that would make the permit review straightforward. The kind of documentation that came from someone who understood not just the design problem, but the regulatory process around it. It was genuinely excellent work. He looked at it for a long time. He sent her a message that said, "These are excellent. Thank you." She responded 12 minutes later. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until the reinspection passes." He smiled at his phone and then felt slightly self-conscious about smiling at his phone and put it face down on the table. The reinspection was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the interval, the routine of site visits and working sessions continued, and Lily became part of it. This had happened gradually enough that Ethan couldn't identify a specific moment when it began. The first time Lily met Claire at the trailer, he had brought her to the site on a Friday afternoon because school had let out early and he had a 3 o'clock meeting with the concrete supplier that he couldn't reschedule. Lily had sat in the corner of the trailer with a book, which lasted approximately 7 minutes before she drifted toward the drafting table, the old one, the one from the auction, and stood looking at it with her hands clasped behind her back in the posture she adopted when she was studying something carefully. Claire was at the newer folding table, reviewing revised drawings. She had not acknowledged Lily's presence beyond a brief look when Ethan brought her in. "You put the table here," Lily said. Claire looked up. "Yes." "It's not lonely anymore." Claire held Lily's gaze for a moment. Something moved across her face that she let happen, briefly, before she looked back at her drawings. "No," she said. "It's not." Lily accepted this and went back to her book. But after that, when Lily came to the site, which happened 3 more times over the following 2 weeks, because Ethan's schedule was what it was and he didn't always have alternatives, she and Claire developed a kind of careful, mutual, utterly unannounced rapport. Claire asked her questions the way adults rarely asked children questions, with actual interest in the answer rather than the performance of interest. "What are you reading? What's it about? What do you think happens next?" Lily answered with the slightly formal seriousness she reserved for people she was deciding to trust. And she watched Claire's hands when she drew, and once asked if the measurements had to be exact, and Claire said yes, always, because the difference between right and almost right in a building was the difference between a ramp someone could use and one someone couldn't. Lily had thought about this for a moment. "That seems important," she said. "It is," Claire said. It was the most stripped-down explanation of her work Ethan had ever heard her give, and it was the most honest. There were other moments in those 2 weeks that he registered without examining too closely. The afternoon she arrived at the trailer, and he had a coffee waiting. He'd made a second cup without deciding to, the same way he sometimes set a third place at dinner when his sister was visiting and then caught himself when he remembered she wasn't. She hadn't commented on the coffee. She'd just taken it and kept working. A Thursday evening phone call that had started as a question about the permit timeline and lasted 40 minutes, moving from the project to a conversation about load calculations and older building stock, and then to a disagreement about whether post-tensioned concrete was underused in mid-rise residential construction, which they argued about with the unguarded energy of people who had briefly forgotten to be careful with each other. He was driving home from that call. He'd taken it in the truck, parked in the lot next to his office, and he sat there for a minute after it ended, looking at the dark street outside the windshield, aware of something he didn't fully name. He started the truck and drove home. The reinspection was 2 weeks out, and the problem in front of them was still the problem in front of them. And that was what mattered. What Ethan did not know during those 2 weeks was that Claire's evenings were their own kind of complicated. Her apartment on Sycamore Street was small and precisely organized in the way that small spaces become when the person living in them has learned that disorder has a higher cost than in larger rooms. The kitchen was arranged for reach from a seated position. She had done the reorganization herself the first week, methodically, while still being angry enough about the whole situation that she'd thrown out a set of upper cabinet shelves rather than dealing with the spatial planning required to make them usable. She had not replaced them. The gap was still there. She worked at a table by the window. The view was a parking lot, and beyond it, a row of maples that had gone bare by October. She had learned to work at night because nights were easier. No one called, no one stopped by, no one arranged their face into the expression she had started calling, privately, the look, which was the expression people gave her when they hadn't seen her since before the accident and were recalibrating everything they'd known about her in real time, their faces doing this small, involuntary work of revision that they probably weren't even aware of. Ethan Brooks did not have the look. She had noticed this at the auction and confirmed it across the subsequent weeks. He looked at her the way he looked at anyone he was working with, directly, with attention, reassessing when what she said gave him new information, not reassessing when what she did involved her wheelchair, which was as it should be, but was, in her experience, relatively uncommon. Most people, even well-meaning ones, the ones who tried, had a slight recalibration they did when she navigated something physical, a small unconscious holding of breath and releasing it when she succeeded, as if they'd been prepared to intervene or to acknowledge difficulty. Ethan didn't have it. He just watched her the way he watched the sight, with attention, because attention was his baseline orientation toward anything that mattered to what he was doing. She found it both easier and harder than she'd expected. Easier because professional collaboration without the overlay of pity was something she'd been hungry for without quite admitting it to herself. Harder because without the friction of managing someone else's discomfort, she had less to concentrate on, and the work itself had started to remind her of things. She had spent a year telling herself that the accident had ended her career. She had built that story carefully, brick by brick, because it was easier to accept a complete ending than to live in the uncertainty of whether she could rebuild something and fail. The settlement had felt like a confirmation. The auction had felt like a confirmation. Even the apartment with its view of a parking lot had felt like a confirmation. But she was sitting at her table at 11:30 on a Thursday night, looking at a revised circulation plan that was, objectively, good work. Her work, work that used everything she knew. And the confirmation was less solid than it had been. She put her pen down. She rubbed her eyes with the heels of her hands. Her phone was on the table. The text thread with Ethan was the most recent one. She looked at it without touching it. She picked up the phone and called her friend Dana, who answered on the second ring with the resigned alertness of someone who had learned to keep their phone close when Claire was in working mode. "It's almost midnight," Dana said. "I know. Are you up?" "I'm up now. I wanted to tell someone that I think the Millbrook solution is going to work." A pause. "Yeah?" "The structural drawings confirm the infill wall theory. The revised plan is clean. The re-inspection should pass." "Claire," Dana's voice had changed quality. "That's really good." "I know. That's the first job you've taken since—" "I know. How does it feel?" She looked at the drawings on the table, at the careful annotated corrections, at the evidence of 60 hours of work that she had done well. "Like something I thought was over might not be over," she said. It cost her something to say it. She wasn't sure what exactly, but she could feel the cost. "That's actually great news," Dana said quietly. "Don't make a thing of it." "I'm not making a thing of it. You're doing the voice." "I don't have a voice." "You have a voice, Dana. Everyone has a voice. I'm going to bed." "Claire, good night." She hung up and sat for a moment. Then she rolled to the window and looked at the parking lot and the bare maples and the flat November sky with no stars in it, and let herself feel, for just that moment, the small and fragile and possibly unearned thing that she was not ready to name, but that was there anyway, sitting in her chest like a pilot light that hadn't been on in a very long time. Then she went back to the table and made 3 more corrections to the drawings, because the re-inspection was 2 weeks out, and the work still needed to be right. The re-inspection passed, not cleanly. There was one additional correction required on the parking level signage that the original report hadn't flagged, but the re-inspection team caught, a tactile guidance strip placement that was technically compliant, but positioned in a way that created a navigation ambiguity for someone using a white cane. Claire had spotted it herself during a final walkthrough the afternoon before and had flagged it in her notes, so when the inspector raised it, Ethan already had Calvin's crew standing by with the correction materials. The inspector signed off by 2:15 in the afternoon. Ethan called Claire from the parking lot while Calvin was still packing up the correction materials behind him. "It passed," he said. "I know. Gerard texted me. I wanted to tell you myself." A brief pause. "Okay. You told me." "Claire." "What?" "Thank you, genuinely." She was quiet for a moment in a way that he had learned to read as her processing something she wasn't sure she wanted to respond to. "The work was good," she said finally. "That's why it passed." Yes, he said. Your work was good. Another pause, shorter this time. Let me know when the permit revision is filed. I will. He waited a beat. Lily wants to know if you're coming to the site on Friday. Why does Lily want to know that? Because she finished her book and apparently wants to ask you something about turning radius calculations. The silence that followed had a different texture than the working silences. She's 7, Claire said. I'm aware. She saw the term in the drawings and looked it up. She has questions. Of course she does. He heard something in Claire's voice that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. A brief, unguarded loosening of the careful control she applied to most things. Tell her yes. Friday is fine. He stood in the parking lot for a moment after hanging up, the late November cold coming in off the street, the sound of Calvin's crew finishing up behind him. He looked at his phone and then at the building in front of him, his project, still standing, still viable, and felt something uncomplicate itself in his chest that had been wound tight for the better part of 3 months. He drove to school pickup in a better mood than he'd been in since August. The letter arrived at Claire's apartment on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the reinspection, forwarded from an address she no longer lived at through a legal address of record system she had set up during the settlement and mostly forgotten about. It was a large envelope, cream-colored, with the name of a law firm printed in the upper left corner, Aldrich, Penn, and Harrow, LLP. The same firm that had represented Marcus Hale during the settlement proceedings. She looked at it for a long moment before opening it. The document inside was dense and formal, 12 pages with attachments, and it took her 2 full readings to parse what it was actually saying beneath the legal language. The summary was this. The settlement agreement she had signed 14 months ago contained a non-compete and non-solicitation clause, standard language that she had negotiated down from its original scope but had not eliminated entirely. And Marcus Hale, through Aldrich, Penn, and Harrow, was now asserting that her consulting work on the Millbrook project constituted a violation of that clause. His position was that Millbrook Development Corporation, the project owner, had been a prospective client of the former Hawthorne Design Group at the time of the settlement, and that by providing services to their contractor, Ethan, she had effectively solicited and worked for a restricted party. His proposed remedy was an injunction preventing her from providing any further architectural consulting or design services in Briar Ridge or the surrounding 3-county area for a period of 2 years, plus damages equal to the fees she had collected on the Millbrook project, plus legal fees. She set the document down on the table. She looked at the window, the parking lot, the bare maples, the flat December sky. She sat there for several minutes without moving. Then she picked up the document and read it a 3rd time, more slowly, making notes in the margins in the same small, precise handwriting she used on drawings. She did not call Ethan that day. She did not call Dana. She called her attorney, a woman named Priya Sanyal, who had handled the original settlement and who answered her office phone on the 2nd ring and listened without interrupting while Claire read the relevant sections aloud. When she finished, Priya was quiet for a moment. Send me the full document today. Today, she said. I need to read the specific language of the non-compete as it was finalized, because my recollection is that we narrowed it substantially. We narrowed the client list, Claire said. I need to know if Millbrook Development was on the restricted list. So do I. Send me everything today. What's your initial read? Another pause. My initial read is that Marcus is pushing a broad interpretation of narrow language and hoping you don't have the resources to fight it. That's his pattern. Priya's voice was careful but not gentle about it. But I need the documents before I can tell you more than that. Claire sent everything within the hour. Then she sat at her table and looked at her phone and spent approximately 15 minutes deciding whether to call Ethan before deciding that she had to, because the injunction, if it proceeded, would affect his project directly, and he deserved to know. He picked up on the 2nd ring. Hey, everything okay? No, she said. I need to tell you something. She told him about the letter. She gave him the legal summary clearly and without editorializing, the same way she delivered site findings. Facts first, implications second, emotion not at all. She heard him go quiet partway through and stay quiet until she finished. This is because you worked on my project, he said. It's because Marcus Hale is Marcus Hale. Your project is the mechanism, not the cause. Claire, don't, she said. I know what you're about to say, and I don't want to hear it. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to say you're sorry, and possibly that this is your fault somehow, and it isn't, so don't. A long pause. I was going to ask what you need from me. She stopped. She hadn't expected that. She sat there for a moment with the phone against her ear and the document spread on the table in front of her and reorganized what she'd been prepared to say. I need the original contract between Brooks Construction and Millbrook Development, she said, and I need any documentation showing the date you first contracted me versus the date the project started. The timeline matters. I can have those to you by tonight. Good. She paused. There's a chance the injunction gets filed regardless of what the documents show. If that happens, your project gets flagged while the legal process runs. You need to know that. How long would that take? Arbitration, if it goes that route, could be 2 to 4 months. He absorbed this. My project is already behind schedule. I know. If it gets flagged, I know, Ethan. Her voice was not sharp, but it was direct. I'm telling you so you can start contingency planning, not so we can sit here cataloging how bad it is. Another silence, and this time she could almost feel him recalibrating. The same kind of recalibration she did herself when the ground shifted and standing still wasn't an option. Okay, he said. Documents tonight. What else? Nothing right now. Let me hear from Priya first. Who is Priya? My attorney. Is she good? She's the one who got me out of the original settlement with anything left. Yes, she's good. Okay. A pause. Claire, I'm not going anywhere on this. You might need to, she said. If the injunction files and the project flags, you may need to distance yourself from my involvement publicly. It could matter for your timeline. I said I'm not going anywhere. That's a complete sentence. She looked at the window, the maples, the flat sky. I heard you, she said. Good. A beat. Call me when you hear from Priya. She said she would and ended the call and sat there for a moment in the particular stillness of a situation that had just gotten significantly worse and that she was not yet sure she had the resources, legal, financial, emotional, to navigate. She had been here before, a different version of here, a year and a half ago, sitting in a hospital bed reading the first reports of what Marcus had done while she was still learning to use a wheelchair. She had survived that. She reminded herself of that fact the way you remind yourself of a fact you need to keep accessible. Not for comfort, exactly, but for orientation. She pulled the document back toward her and kept reading. Priya's assessment came 2 days later, delivered over the phone in the measured cadence of someone who had learned to give difficult news without either softening it dishonestly or making it harder than it needed to be. The non-compete as finalized covers direct solicitation of clients on a specific restricted list, Priya said. Millbrook Development Corporation is on that list. However, and this matters, the restriction applies to direct client relationships. You didn't contract with Millbrook, you contracted with Brooks Construction, who contracted with Millbrook. Marcus's position is that it's a pass-through. Marcus's position is aggressive, and it may not hold. The question is whether the arbitrator reads the clause as covering indirect relationships through contractor chains, which is not standard interpretation. The language we fought for specifically says direct client engagement. His team is going to argue that direct modifies the type of service, not the contractual relationship. We're going to argue the opposite. What are the odds? A pause. If I had to guess, 60-40 in your favor, but that's not a number I'd bet your career on comfortably. It's a number I have to bet my career on. I don't have another option. There's always settlement. I settled once, Claire said. How did that work out? Priya didn't answer that. I'm going to request the full arbitration record from the original proceedings and review Marcus's filings again. If there's any procedural issue with how this notice was served or how the restriction was originally disclosed to you, I want to find it. How long before the injunction filing? If they're going to file, probably 30 days. They served the letter first as a courtesy to give you the opportunity to cease the activity voluntarily. I've already ceased. The Millbrook work is complete. Then what they're really after is the damages and the 2-year restriction, Priya said. The injunction was the threat to make you take the letter seriously. The real fight is over whether you owe them money and whether you can work in this market for the next 2 years. Claire was quiet. He wants to make sure I can't rebuild, she said. That's my read, Priya said, without softening it. Yes. She thanked Priya and ended the call and sat very still. Outside, the December light was already going gray by 3 in the afternoon, the short days of winter arriving with their particular combination of early dark and cold that felt, in her current state, less like weather and more like commentary. She made herself a cup of coffee. It took longer than it should have because she'd reorganized the cabinet where the mugs were kept and hadn't yet re-internalized where everything was. And she knocked a mug off the shelf reaching for it, and it didn't break, but it hit the floor with a sharp crack that was loud in the small apartment, and she sat there for a moment with the counter edge in her hands, jaw tight, looking at the unbroken mug on the floor and not yet deciding whether to pick it up. She picked it up. She made the coffee. She went back to the table and opened her laptop and started building a timeline document. Every date she could document, every email she could retrieve, every record of her engagement with the Millbrook project from first contact to final invoice, because that was what she could control right now. And controlling the things that were within reach was how she had gotten through the last 18 months. She told Ethan the full picture 3 days later at the site trailer in the early evening after his crew had left. She had asked to meet in person rather than over the phone, and he had read that correctly. He'd had coffee ready, and Calvin hadn't lingered when he finished closing up for the day. She laid it out the way Priya had laid it out to her. The restricted client list, the direct versus indirect engagement argument, the odds. He listened the same way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, without doing anything with his face that required her to manage it. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He's punishing you for winning, he said. He's removing a competitive threat while he can, she said. It's not personal. It feels personal. Most things that aren't personal feel personal when they're happening to you. He looked at her. What do you need to fight this? Time, documentation, a good attorney, which I have, and money to pay that attorney for the next several months. She said this part flatly because the flatness was the only way to say it without it becoming something else. The settlement left me with limited reserves. Priya is working with me on the billing, but there are hard costs. He didn't look away. How much of a problem is that? A significant one. A pause. I'm managing it. Claire, I said I'm managing it. He heard the line in her voice and stopped pushing, but he also did not let it go entirely. She could see that, the way he was sitting with it, rather than accepting it. I want to help if there's a way to, he said, on the legal costs. No. Why not? Because I'm not a charity case and because mixing that into our professional relationship would complicate things in ways that aren't useful. What if I framed it as an advance against future consulting work? She looked at him. That's a kind fiction. It's a practical arrangement. He held her gaze steadily. You helped save my project. The project is viable because of your work. I have an interest in you being able to continue working in this market. That's a very rational way to describe it. I'm a rational person. She was quiet for a moment. I'll think about it, she said, which was the closest she could get to yes right now, and they both knew it. The trailer was quiet. Outside, the construction site had the particular stillness of an active project at rest. Equipment parked, scaffolding standing unoccupied, the skeleton of a building waiting for morning. She looked at the drafting table in the corner, her table, the auction table, the table with its mismatched leg and its pencil grooves, and she thought about how strange it was that it had ended up here, in the same space as her fight to exist professionally, as though it had followed her from one version of her life into the next. There's something I haven't told you, she said. He waited. The accident. She paused. She was looking at the table, not at him. I've told you the basic version. Site visit, structural failure, I was paralyzed. What I haven't said is that the worker who was standing next to me, a man named Dale Pritchard, didn't survive it. The trailer was very quiet. He was 29. He had a kid, a girl, 18 months old. She kept her eyes on the table surface, the familiar grooves of old work. I've carried that. For 18 months, I've carried the fact that I walked onto that site on a gut feeling about a permit timeline. And because I was there, he was in that part of the building because I'd asked him to show me the framing sequence. And she stopped, started again. There's no straight line that makes it my fault. I know that. Priya told me, my therapist told me. Everyone who's looked at it rationally has told me the same thing. But there's also no line that fully removes me from it, and I've had trouble knowing what to do with that. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, but not careful in the managed, stepping around way. It was careful the way someone was careful with something they actually valued. I've had trouble knowing what to do with things too, he said. Different things, but the same kind of trouble. She looked at him then. My wife died 2.5 years ago, he said. Breast cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. Lily was 4. He looked at his hands on the table. I've spent the time since then convinced that I'm doing it wrong. Raising her, being her dad without Nora there. Lily draws these pictures sometimes, family pictures, and for the first year after she died, Lily used to leave a space in the drawings. An empty space where Nora would have been. He paused. She stopped doing that about 8 months ago. I don't know if that's better or worse. I don't know if I'm supposed to be glad she's adjusting or sad that she's adjusting, or whether what I actually am is just scared that I'm the only thing standing between her and something going wrong. And I'm not enough for that. Claire was looking at him now, without looking away. You're not enough, she said. That's a convoluted way to put it. I mean it. What I've seen is a man who built a ramp for a neighbor, who trusted his daughter's instinct about a piece of furniture, who hasn't once treated me like I need to be handled. You're not doing it wrong. He met her eyes. You're not responsible for Dale Pritchard, he said. You're responsible for the grief of it. Those aren't the same thing. She was quiet. Something moved across her face that she didn't immediately close off. A brief unguarded cracking of the careful surface, fast enough that it wasn't a moment so much as the edge of one. I know that, she said. Some days I actually know that. That's enough, he said. That's what some days is for. She nodded once. She looked back at the table. They sat in the quiet of the trailer for a while, not talking, and it was the kind of not talking that was different from silence. It had weight and texture and something moving through it that neither of them was naming. The arbitration notice came in January. Marcus Hale's legal team had filed, as Priya had predicted, seeking the injunction and damages. The arbitration date was set for the end of February, a compressed timeline that Priya said was aggressive but not unusual for commercial disputes in their jurisdiction. 6 weeks. Ethan's project had been flagged by Millbrook Development's legal team pending the outcome, which meant a section of the construction timeline was on hold while the ownership group assessed their exposure. It was not a project killing hold. The structural and framing work on the upper floors could proceed, but it was a complication that cost money every week it continued. And Ethan absorbed this with a set jaw and a series of very short conversations with Calvin about what could be accelerated on the upper floors to offset the delay costs. He did not blame her. She watched for it. For the small recalibrations, the shift in register, the subtle ways in which people adjusted their treatment of you when you became a problem in their life rather than a solution. She had become expert at detecting that shift over the last 18 months. It didn't come. Stop waiting for me to be angry at you, he said one afternoon, directly and without particular drama, the way he said most direct things. She looked up from the document spread across the table between them. I'm not... You've checked my face about 6 times in the last 40 minutes. I know what that is. He wasn't accusing her, he was just saying it. I told you I'm not going anywhere. I meant it. The project delay is a problem I'm going to solve. It's not something I need you to feel responsible for. She held his gaze for a moment. You're very difficult to fight with, she said. I've been told. That's not a compliment. I know. He picked up the cost projection she'd been reviewing. Walk me through the delay offset calculation again. She did. They worked for another 2 hours and ordered sandwiches from a place 3 blocks from the site that Lily had recommended, on the basis that the owner's daughter was in her class, and she wanted to support local businesses. which was a priority Lily had apparently developed from somewhere, and that Ethan had found impossible to argue against. The sandwiches were good. They ate at opposite ends of the table with documents between them, and the site trailer windows going dark as the January evening came down. "How's Lily?" Claire asked at some point during a lull. "She asked me yesterday if you were going to be okay." Claire stopped with her sandwich halfway to her mouth. "She knows about the legal situation?" "She knows something is wrong. She's 7, not oblivious." He paused. "I told her you were dealing with something complicated at work. She said you'd figure it out because you know how buildings work, and buildings are complicated too." Claire set her sandwich down. She looked at the table for a moment. "She's a remarkable kid," she said. "She gets it from her mother." He said it without the heaviness that had been in his voice the first time he'd mentioned Nora, back in November. Still present, still real, but sitting differently, like something he was learning to carry rather than something that was carrying him. Nora used to say that the way you handle difficult things shows who you are more than anything else. She was right. She was right about most things. He looked across the table. "You're handling this right." "I'm barely holding it together." "That's handling it right," he said. "Holding it together when it's barely is the whole job." She looked at him for a long moment. There was something about Ethan Brooks, something she had been slowly identifying across the months of working beside him, that she couldn't fully articulate, but that amounted to this. He did not require her to be more okay than she was. He did not need her to reassure him that she was fine. He did not add to the weight she was carrying by making her also manage his feelings about her weight. She had not understood, until she had it, how much energy she had been spending on that particular form of management with almost everyone else in her life. "Priya found something," she said. He looked up. "What?" "In the original settlement documents. The restricted client list was attached as an exhibit. Millbrook Development is on it, but the exhibit has an effective date of 30 days after settlement signing, a grace period for projects already in progress at the time of settlement. Priya's argument is that the Millbrook project was not just in progress, but had already received initial permitting before the settlement date, which means it may fall within the grace period coverage." He was very still. "Does that hold?" "It's not airtight. Marcus's team will argue that the project entering the accessibility compliance phase constitutes a new engagement scope, but..." She paused. "It's real. It's not a reach. The language supports the reading. 60-40 just moved. Priya thinks maybe 70-30. She won't go higher than that." 70-30 is better than 60-40. "Yes," she said. "It is." He looked at her across the documents and the sandwich wrappers and the fading light and the weeks of work between them. "We're going to be okay," he said. She thought about the grace period provision. She thought about Priya's voice on the phone, careful and measured, and with something underneath the care that sounded like confidence. She thought about the timeline document she had built, every date accounted for, the record of her work assembled into something that held together cleanly when you looked at it. "We might be," she said. And then, because she was trying, some days trying was what it looked like, she said, "Yes, I think we might be." The February arbitration date was 6 weeks out. The light outside the trailer windows was fully dark now. Somewhere above them, on the upper floors of the building, Ethan's crew had left their work for the night, and the structure stood in the winter dark, incomplete and in progress, which was exactly what it was and was not yet a failure. The arbitration hearing lasted 2 days. Priya had prepared Claire for this, had walked her through the format, the likely sequence of arguments, the particular way that Marcus Hale's legal team would frame the restricted client clause, and the counter-arguments they would deploy against each framing. She had prepared her for the possibility that the arbitrator, a retired commercial judge named Helen Marsh, would ask Claire directly to characterize the nature of her engagement with Millbrook Development, and she had coached her on how to answer that question accurately without offering language that Marcus's team could use against her. What Priya had not been able to prepare her for, entirely, was sitting in the same room as Marcus Hale for the first time since the conference room where he had used the phrase operational continuity 4 times and never raised his voice. He looked the same. That was the thing she hadn't anticipated. She had expected, irrationally, that he would look different, that the 1.5 years would have marked him somehow, that some visible consequence would have accumulated on his face. It hadn't. He sat at the opposing table in a well-fitted gray suit and looked at her with the same composed, deliberate neutrality he had always deployed in professional settings, and she understood, sitting there, that he had never once lost sleep over what he had done. Not because he was incapable of it, but because he had genuinely, at some fundamental level, believed he was right. That was harder to sit across from than anger would have been. Ethan was not in the hearing room. He had offered to come, and she had told him no. Not sharply, but clearly. His presence would give Marcus's team a narrative they could use, a story about personal entanglement between the consultant and the contractor, and she needed the hearing to stay on the documents and the timeline and the specific language of the clause. She needed it to be about the work, not about anything else. She had, however, let him drive her there. He had arrived at Sycamore Street at 7:45 in the morning without being asked, which meant he had decided to come and had not opened it for debate. And she had decided not to debate it because it was 7:45 in the morning, and she hadn't slept particularly well, and there were limits to how much she was going to push back on someone showing up when it mattered. He had carried her document bag to the car without asking and hadn't talked much on the drive, which she was grateful for. When he pulled up to the building where the arbitration firm had its offices, he said, "Call me when you're done for the day." And she said she would. She did not look back at the car when she went in. Dratin. Marcus's argument was what Priya had predicted. The restricted client clause covered not just direct engagement, but beneficial service relationships. And Claire's work had directly benefited Millbrook Development regardless of the contractual chain that connected them. His attorney, a precise and unhurried woman named Lena Pratt, walked Helen Marsh through the settlement exhibit with the patient efficiency of someone who had done this kind of argument many times and knew exactly where the pressure points were. She cited 3 comparable arbitration decisions in the state. She noted that the grace period provision Priya was relying on was contingent on projects actively in construction at the settlement date, and argued that Millbrook's accessibility compliance phase constituted a new project scope that post-dated the settlement. She was good. Claire sat beside Priya and listened to Lena Pratt dismantle the grace period argument with the steady, methodical precision of someone taking apart a piece of machinery, and she kept her face still and her hands quiet and her notes moving across the legal pad in front of her. Small, precise handwriting, the same handwriting that was on every set of drawings she'd produced across her career. When Priya responded, she did not match Lena Pratt's cadence. She was faster and more direct, and she had brought something Lena Pratt had not anticipated. A project chronology that Ethan had compiled across the previous 6 weeks, documenting every phase of the Millbrook project with time-stamped permits, contract dates, and inspection records. The accessibility phase did not constitute a new scope. It was a compliance correction within the existing permitted scope. The project's initial building permit, which covered the full construction sequence including all accessibility elements, was dated 11 days before the settlement agreement was signed. 11 days. Helen Marsh studied the chronology for a long time. She asked 3 clarifying questions, 2 directed at Priya and 1 directed directly at Claire. "Ms. Hawthorne," she said, "your engagement with Brooks Construction began after the settlement date. Is that correct?" "Yes," Claire said. "And your understanding at the time was that the Millbrook project fell within your permitted consulting scope." "My understanding was that my engagement was with Brooks Construction, not with Millbrook Development. I relied on that distinction as established in the settlement language." "Did you seek a legal opinion before taking the engagement?" She had been prepared for this. "I reviewed the settlement agreement myself and concluded the engagement was permissible. I acknowledge, in hindsight, that I should have sought formal legal confirmation. I did not, because I needed the work, and the timeline did not give me the space I should have taken." She paused. "I'm not sure that's a legal point, but it's an honest one." Helen Marsh looked at her for a moment. Her expression gave nothing away, which was the expression of someone who had spent decades on benches and in arbitration rooms and had learned to treat giving things away as a professional failing. But she held Claire's gaze for a moment before looking back at her documents, and something in the quality of that look was different from the procedural attention she had given everything else. The first day ended at 5:15 with no decision. Priya told Claire, in the lobby, that it had gone as well as it possibly could have. "The chronology is solid," she said. The 11-day margin is either going to save you or the arbitrator is going to find a way around it. There's nothing more we can do on the facts. What does she do tomorrow? Tomorrow she hears closing arguments and then she deliberates. Could be a week before we get a decision, could be 2 weeks. Claire nodded. She was very tired in a specific way that wasn't about sleep. The kind of tired that came from spending 8 hours managing your own face in a room where you were also the subject under discussion, where your professional identity and your choices and your right to work in the only city you had a professional network in were all being evaluated by someone who had no obligation to care about any of it beyond the contractual language in front of her. Ethan was parked where he'd dropped her off. She had told him not to wait, and he had waited. She didn't say anything about it when she got in. He didn't say anything about waiting. He said, "How are you doing?" And she said, "Ask me in a week." And he said, "Fair enough," and drove her home. The decision came in 9 days. Priya called at 10 in the morning on a Thursday, and Claire picked up before the first ring had finished, which was not how she normally answered the phone. The grace period argument held, Priya said. Helen Marsh found that the initial building permit, predating the settlement by 11 days, established the Millbrook project as an active construction engagement at the time of settlement. Claire's consulting services fell within the permitted contractor relationship. The injunction is denied. The damages claim is dismissed. Claire was at her kitchen table. She had a half-finished cup of coffee in front of her and a legal pad she'd been writing on, and suddenly wasn't writing on. She sat very still. "Claire? I heard you." "Complete win," Priya said. "He can appeal the arbitration decision, but it's expensive and the grounds are narrow, and frankly, I don't think he has the appetite for another round on this. He wanted a quick win. He didn't get it." "Thank you, Priya." Her voice was steady but thin, as if she was using most of her available capacity for staying steady, and there wasn't much left over for volume. "You built the case," Priya said. "The chronology Ethan Brooks put together was the thing that closed it. Marsh cited it specifically in the written decision. After she hung up, she sat at the kitchen table for a while. The coffee went cold. She looked at the parking lot through the window. February now. The maples still bare. A thin layer of old snow on the asphalt that had been there for 2 weeks and gone gray with time. She thought about Dale Pritchard's daughter, who would be 3 by now. She thought about Marcus's face in the hearing room, composed and deliberate and sure. She thought about the 11 days between a building permit and a signed settlement, and how the entire shape of the last 9 months had balanced on that margin. Then she picked up her phone and called Ethan. He answered immediately. "Priya called you." "Yes." "And?" "Complete win," she said. "The injunction is denied." The sound he made was not words. It was the brief, unguarded sound of relief physically leaving a body that had been holding it for too long. She heard it and felt something loosen in her own chest in response. Some corresponding tension she hadn't fully acknowledged was there. "The chronology you built," she said. "Priya said Marsh cited it in the written decision. You need to know that. We built it together. You did the compilation work. You told me which dates mattered." A pause. "Claire, how are you?" She looked at the parking lot, at the gray snow and the bare trees and the flat February sky. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think I need a day before I know." "That's fair." She could hear him smiling slightly in the way he did when he wasn't going to push. "Take the day." "The Millbrook hold..." "I'll call Millbrook's legal team this afternoon. The hold should clear within the week." "Good." She paused. "Thank you, Ethan, for the chronology, for the ride, for..." She stopped, started again. "For not going anywhere." "I told you it was a complete sentence," he said. Bummed. Spring arrived in Briar Ridge in the way it usually did. Not all at once, but in argument with itself. Warm days interrupted by cold snaps. The maples outside Claire's apartment window going from bare to budding to a sudden committed green over the course of 3 weeks in April. The Millbrook project came off hold and resumed, and Ethan's crew worked through March and into April with the compressed urgency of a team making up lost time, and the building that had been a source of crisis for most of the previous fall began to look, from the outside, like it was simply a building being built. Claire watched the change of season from her apartment and from the site trailer, and from a new coffee shop on Meridian Street that she had started going to on Tuesday and Thursday mornings because the table by the window was at the right height, and the staff had learned to stop asking if she needed help with the door after the third visit. She had started working again. Not just on Millbrook, Priya had filed the arbitration decision with the State Architectural Licensing Board as a formal record, establishing that her consulting activity was legally permissible, and 2 referrals had come through in March from Gerard, who had apparently been telling people quietly that the Millbrook accessibility work was the best compliance redesign he'd seen in 8 years of working in Briar Ridge. Neither referral was large. One was a restaurant owner who needed accessible route corrections before a health department review. One was a small medical office building that had been cited for ADA violations in a tenant audit. They were not the kind of projects she had been building toward before the accident, but they were work, and the work was good, and she did it the way she did everything, completely, with attention to the details that other people glossed over. She and Ethan talked every few days, not always about the project, sometimes about Lily, who had advanced to a chapter book series about a girl detective that she was reading with a level of investment that Ethan described as concerning in the best possible way. Sometimes about the restaurant referral, because Ethan knew the building's contractor and had an opinion about the subfloor issue the existing accessible route correction was going to create. Sometimes about nothing in particular, a conversation that started as a project question and migrated somewhere else before either of them had decided it would. She noticed this happening. She let it happen. One evening in late April, Ethan arrived at the trailer. She had been reviewing drawings for the medical office project, with Lily in tow and a paper bag from the sandwich place Lily had recommended in January. He set the bag on the table and Lily dropped her backpack and immediately went to the old drafting table in the corner where she had taken to doing her homework on site visit days, arranging her books and pencil case with the serious organizational focus she brought to all physical arrangements. She has a history project, Ethan said, by way of explanation. On what? Architecture, Lily said from the corner, without looking up. I picked it. Claire looked at Ethan. He spread his hand slightly. She picked it. What can I tell you? She looked back at her drawings and didn't let the expression that wanted to happen actually happen. And when she looked back down at her work, she thought she felt the room settle in a particular way. The 3 of them at their respective tables in the trailer with the spring evening going blue outside the windows. And she thought this is something, this specific configuration of people and light and quiet industry is something, without being able to name it more precisely than that. What period? She asked. Lily looked up. What? Your history project. What period of architecture? Mid-century modern, Lily said, because of Eames. Who told you about Eames? Lily looked at her with the patient expression of someone waiting for the obvious answer to arrive. You did, she said. In October, when I asked about the chair in the lobby design. Claire had in fact mentioned Eames in that conversation. She had not expected a 7-year-old to file it and retrieve it 6 months later. What do you know about Eames so far? She said. They made chairs, Lily said, that were supposed to be comfortable for everyone, and they thought design should solve problems, not just look good. That's a pretty accurate summary. Lily looked satisfied and went back to her paper. Claire went back to her drawings. Ethan unwrapped his sandwich and said nothing, and the quiet held. It was a Tuesday in early May when Ethan brought up the idea. They were walking the Millbrook site. The lobby level was finished now, the corrected vestibule and the reconfigured accessible route, and the properly graded parking connection all in place. And there was something quietly significant about walking through a space that had nearly destroyed both of their professional situations and now simply worked, did what a building was supposed to do, allowed people to enter and move through it without the building making that movement into a problem. I want to show you something, he said. He led her to the lobby's main corridor, which opened at the far end into what the plans called a community room, a large flexible space that the development had included as a condition of the zoning approval. It was framed and drywalled, the floor poured but not finished, the ceiling grid in place. It was an empty room, waiting to become something. They haven't specified the interior fit-out yet, Ethan said. The development team has a budget for it, but no designer. They asked if I had a recommendation. She looked at the room. Light came through the two south-facing windows, large windows, correctly proportioned, good light. The ceiling height was generous. The structural grid gave the space a natural rhythm that the interior design could work with or against. What kind of community room, she said. Multi-use. Events, programming, meetings. The building has 40% affordable units, so the population it serves is genuinely mixed. She moved through the space, measuring distances with her eye the way she'd done since she was 22. Not perfectly, not with the accuracy of a laser tool, but with the practiced approximation of someone who had spent years reading rooms. She noted the windowsill heights, the door placement, the relationship between the two entries. The eastern entry doesn't work, she said. It opens directly across from a structural column that creates a pinch point. Anyone coming in from the parking level, which is the accessible route, walks into a funnel. I know, Ethan said. The column can't move. I know that too. She kept moving through the space. You could offset the door 2 feet north and reconfigure the adjacent wall segment to create an angled entry that opens the line of sight and eliminates the pinch. She paused. It's a small change. It changes the whole feel of the room. I know, he said again, and something in his voice was different on the third repetition. Quieter and more deliberate. She stopped and looked at him. I want to propose something, he said, and I want you to hear it completely before you respond. She waited. The Millbrook project taught me that what I've been doing, standard residential and light commercial construction with accessibility as a compliance checkbox, is not what I want to keep doing. I've been thinking about that for months. He was looking at her with the direct steadiness she had come to expect from him. There's a market in this city, in this whole region, for construction and design work that treats accessibility as the starting point instead of the correction. Not ADA minimums. Actual design that assumes everyone who walks into a building or rolls or navigates it any other way deserves to have it work for them. She was quiet. I can build it, he said. I have the crew, I have the relationships, I have the project management experience. What I don't have is the design expertise to make what I build actually accomplish what I'm describing. I need a design partner who understands accessibility not as a specialty accommodation, but as an architectural principle. He paused. I'm asking if you want to build this with me. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the room around them. The good light, the generous ceiling, the pinch point entry that a 2-foot door offset would correct. She thought about the restaurant correction and the medical office and Gerard's referral and Priya's filing with the licensing board and the pilot light that had been on since November in her chest, burning small and steady. What are you proposing exactly? She said, in structural terms. Equal partnership. You handle design and client consultation. I handle construction and project management. We share the business equally. He paused. I've had a business attorney draft a framework. Nothing binding. I wanted to have the conversation before the paperwork. You had a framework drafted. I've been thinking about this since January. He said it without apology. The legal situation clarified things. I didn't want to bring it up while we were in the middle of that, so I waited. She looked at the room, at the south windows with their good light, at the structural column and the pinch point that a small change would fix. I need to see the framework, she said. I know. And I need to talk to Priya before I sign anything. Obviously. And I'm going to have opinions about how the business is structured that may not match what your attorney drafted. I'm expecting that. She looked at him. Why? She said. Why me specifically, beyond the professional case? He held her gaze. Because you see things that other people walk past, he said. You saw a problem in a building that 2 other professionals missed. You saw a grace period provision in a 12-page legal document that could have gone unnoticed. And because, he paused, he was not a man who stumbled on words often, and the pause was notable because of it. Because the way you approach a room, any space, is the way I think buildings should be approached. Like every person who's going to be in that space matters, not as a category, as a person. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the south windows. Send me the framework, she said. I'll send it tonight. I'm going to have changes. Send me your changes. She looked back at him. This is a significant risk, she said, financially and professionally, for both of us. I know. I don't want you to do this because you feel obligated to me after the legal situation. I don't do things I don't believe in because of obligation. He said it simply, the way he said things he was certain of. I believe in this. I believe in you. She let that sit for a moment. She did not deflect it or reduce it or find a way to hand it back smaller than it was. She just let it be there. I'll read the framework tonight, she said. They finished the site walk, and she noted the pinch point door offset and 3 other interior specifications in the community room that the development team hadn't addressed. And she sent them to Ethan before she left the building because they were there, and they were correct, and the room would be better for them, which was always the only reason she needed. Lily brought the drawing home on a Friday. It was not a homework assignment, and it was not for any class. She had done it at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning 2 weeks after the site walk, while Ethan was on a phone call in the other room, and the radio was playing something low from the counter. She used colored pencils, which she preferred over markers because she liked the way the colors layered. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a house. The house had windows with flower boxes and a front path, and clearly delineated along the left side of the front steps, a ramp. Not an afterthought ramp, but a ramp that was part of the house's design, curved and intentional. The tallest figure had brown hair and was holding something that might have been a hammer or a wrench. The shortest figure had 2 braids, distinctly uneven, which Lily had rendered with accurate detail. The third figure was in a wheelchair, and her hair was pulled back, and she was holding what appeared to be a rolled set of drawings. Ethan found the drawing on the kitchen table when he finished his call. He stood and looked at it for a long moment. Lily came in from the hallway. She looked at him looking at the drawing. For the office, she said. When you have the new office, Claire said there's going to be an office. You talked to Claire about the office? She told me you were thinking about it. She said nothing was decided. Lily picked up her pencil case and began putting pencils back in order by color. I made it for the wall, so the office looks like it belongs to people. Ethan looked at the 3 figures, the hammer, the braids, the rolled drawings, and the wheelchair, and the ramp that was part of the design, and not bolted on as an afterthought. Who are the people? He said, even though he knew. Lily gave him the look she reserved for questions whose answers were obvious. That's our family, she said, and went back to sorting her pencils. He stood at the kitchen table for a long time after that. That evening he called Claire. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Lily made something, he said. I want to show you. A pause. Is everything okay? Yes. He looked at the drawing, still on the table. More than okay, I think. He paused. Can I bring it over? I know it's Friday night. It's 8 o'clock, she said. I know. A pause, shorter than most of her pauses. I have coffee, she said. Come over. He drove to Sycamore Street with the drawing careful on the passenger seat, the city going dark and quiet around him, the spring evening warm enough to have the window down. He had been to Claire's apartment twice before, both times briefly for document exchanges, and both times he had noticed the gaps in the upper cabinets and the precise organization of the workspace and the window with its view of the parking lot and the maples that were, now, fully green. She opened the door, and he handed her the drawing without preamble. She held it. She looked at it for a long time, longer than he'd expected, which meant something. He watched her look at it and did not say anything. The ramp, she said finally. Her voice was not quite steady. She made it part of the house, he said, not an addition. Claire looked at the drawing for another moment. He could see something happening in her face, a slow, almost reluctant opening, like a window that had been painted shut and was being worked loose a little at a time, the paint cracking around the frame before it moved. She's going to be extraordinary, Claire said. She said it quietly, looking at the drawing. She already is. Claire looked up at him. The lamp in the apartment was warm, and the window behind her showed the parking lot and the green maples and the spring night, and she was holding a colored pencil drawing of 3 people in front of a house with a ramp that belonged there, and her face was doing something that she was not, for once, closing off. I read the framework, she said. I know you did. You sent me 14 comments. 11 of them were substantive. All 14 were right. He paused. What do you think? She looked at the drawing once more. She set it carefully on the table beside her, gently, the way you set down something you intend to keep. I think, she said, that we should build it. He let out a breath he hadn't entirely realized he was holding. Yeah? Yes. A pause. I have conditions. Tell me your conditions. Over coffee, she said. Sit down. He sat. She poured the coffee, both cups, without asking how he took his, because she knew by now, which was a small thing, but sat in his chest with a warmth that was not small at all. She set his cup in front of him and pulled her own close and looked at him across her kitchen table in her small, precise apartment with its parking lot view and its cabinet gaps and its evidence of a life that had been broken down and was being rebuilt into something different from what it had been before, but not lesser. First condition, she said. Go ahead, he said. She told him. Her first condition was that the company have a name that said exactly what it did, not something abstract. Not a portmanteau of their surnames or a geographic reference or the kind of aspirational single-word brand that architectural firms used when they wanted to sound established before they were. Something that told a prospective client, in plain language, what they were walking into. Ethan had agreed to this immediately, which had surprised her slightly. She had prepared for a conversation about branding and market positioning and the way certain kinds of names signaled credibility to certain kinds of clients. He had just said, You're right. What do you have in mind? She had said she didn't have anything finalized yet. He had said to take her time. She had taken 3 days and come back with groundwork design plus build. He had looked at it for a moment. Groundwork, he said. The ground is where everything starts, she said. Site conditions, foundation, grade, and accessibility starts at the ground. The approach, the entry, the path from the outside world into the building. It's also the least glamorous part of construction and the most important part of design. I think it's honest. I think it's exactly right, he said. The second condition was harder. She had sat with it for almost a week before bringing it to the coffee table conversation, because it required her to say something she had been circling around for months without landing on, and she needed to land on it clearly if she was going to say it at all. Her second condition was that the company's mission be written down and held to, not as marketing language, as an actual internal standard against which they evaluated every project they took and every design decision they made. She wanted it stated simply, they built for everyone, not as a specialty, not as a niche, as a baseline assumption about what a building was for. Ethan had been quiet for a long moment after she said it. Then he said, I want to add something to that. What? That we don't take projects from clients who treat accessibility as a budget problem to minimize, he said. Not a moral position, a practical one. Those projects always cost more in the end because the corrections come after the construction, and the corrections are always worse than the original design. She had looked at him. That's also a moral position, she said. Maybe. He didn't argue with it. Does that work as a condition? Yes, she said. That works. The third condition was the one she almost didn't bring up. She sat with her coffee and looked at the window and the spring night outside it, and made herself say it anyway. Because she had spent too long not saying things that needed saying, and she was trying, actively and imperfectly, to stop. I need this to be mine as much as it's yours, she said. I know you're bringing the existing business infrastructure and the crew and the client relationships. I know the imbalance in starting position, but I need the partnership to be genuinely equal, and I need us to both understand that if it isn't, if it drifts into something where your name is on the outside and my expertise is on the inside, but the decisions are yours, I'll leave. He held her gaze. I understand, he said. I mean it. I know you mean it. He picked up his coffee. I want a partner, Claire, not a consultant with a better title. If I wanted a hierarchy, I'd hire someone. She looked at him for a moment. She believed him. That was the thing. She had been waiting across the whole conversation to find the place where she didn't believe him, and she hadn't found it. She had learned, across the months of working with him, that Ethan Brooks was not a man who said things he didn't mean in order to make a moment easier. He was capable of tact, but not of performance. It was one of the most useful things about him, and occasionally the most unsettling. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "I'm in," she said. "Send the framework to Priya. I'll have her coordinate with your attorney on the revisions." He set his coffee down. Something moved across his face that he didn't try to manage, a relief and a satisfaction, and something else that she didn't examine too directly. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Wait until we have our first client." He smiled at that, the real one, not the professional one. "You said that about the reinspection, and I was right then too." But the first client of Groundwork Design Plus Build came through Gerard, as the Millbrook referral had, but this time it was a different kind of project. A community center in the Eastfield neighborhood, commissioned by a nonprofit that had been operating out of a deteriorating building for 12 years and had finally secured a capital grant to build something new. The budget was modest, the scope was ambitious. The client's primary stated requirement, which the nonprofit's executive director, a direct, tired-looking woman named Sylvia Okafor, who turned out to be the same Mrs. Okafor whose knee injury had prompted Ethan to build a ramp for his neighbor years before, delivered in their first meeting without apparent awareness of its weight, was, "I need a building where nobody feels like an afterthought." Claire and Ethan had looked at each other across the conference table when Sylvia said it. "That's what we do," Claire said. Sylvia looked at her. "Everyone says that?" "I know," Claire said. "Let me show you what we mean." She pulled up the Millbrook lobby drawings, the before and the after, the original circulation that failed and the corrected design that worked, the specific changes and the reasoning behind each one. She showed Sylvia the difference between a compliant, accessible route and a welcoming one, between a building that technically passed inspection and a building that actually functioned for every person who entered it. She did it the way she had explained turning radius to Lily, clearly, without condescension, as though the person listening was capable of understanding the full complexity of it if someone took the time to explain it right. Sylvia listened with the attention of someone who had spent 12 years watching their building fail the people it was supposed to serve. When Claire finished, she looked at both of them and said, "When can you start?" The design process took 4 months. Claire worked on it in the mornings at the new office. A rented space on Clement Street, 2 rooms, and a small conference area, with the old drafting table in the corner where the light was good, and a whiteboard across the entire east wall that she used for circulation diagrams. Ethan handled the contractor coordination and material sourcing and the ongoing relationship with the structural engineer, a young woman named Pam, who had done 2 projects with Ethan before and who adapted immediately to Claire's design process with the practical flexibility of someone who cared more about the building working than about professional territory. Lily visited on Saturdays when school was out, and Ethan's week had been particularly heavy, and bringing her to the office was easier than the alternatives. She did her homework at the old drafting table and occasionally looked up to ask questions that were more informed than they should have been for an 8-year-old, because she had apparently been paying close attention to every conversation about architecture and construction that had happened within her radius for the past year. She had developed specific opinions about natural light. She thought clerestory windows were underused. She told Claire this on a Saturday morning in August with the authority of someone presenting a researched position, and Claire had said, "You're not wrong," and pulled out a section drawing of the community center to show her where the clerestory element was incorporated above the main assembly hall. Lily had looked at the drawing for a long time. "You already did it," she said. "I already did it," Claire confirmed. Lily looked at the drawing and then at Claire with an expression that was very close to the one she'd had at the auction, looking at the drafting table and pronouncing it lonely, that particular quality of focused attention that she brought to things she found meaningful. "Can I learn to draw like this?" she said. "Plans, I mean, not like art drawings." "That's a serious thing to learn." "I know." Lily was entirely serious. "Can you teach me?" Claire looked at her for a moment. 8 years old, sitting at the old drafting table with a section drawing in front of her, asking to be taught the thing that had organized Claire's entire professional life. "Start with orthographic projection," she said. "I'll show you what that means." Lily pulled a fresh sheet of paper from her backpack. She always had paper, and uncapped her pencil and waited. Claire leaned over and began. 6 months after Groundwork Design Plus Build opened its doors, Claire started the rehabilitation program. It had existed as a possibility for longer than that. Her neurologist, a careful man named Dr. Voss, who had been managing her care since the accident, had mentioned an experimental motor function program at the Briar Ridge Rehabilitation Institute 8 months earlier, in a conversation where he had been careful with his language, limited evidence base, highly variable outcomes, not a path toward guaranteed recovery. She had listened and asked 3 specific questions about the methodology, and then said she would think about it, and then she had spent the next 8 months not thinking about it in the specific way you didn't think about something you were afraid to want. It was Ethan who finally asked her directly. They had been at the office late, a Tuesday in October, reviewing the community center construction drawings for a pre-drywall inspection the following week. The work was nearly done. The building was taking its final shape, the spaces she had designed becoming actual rooms that actual people would inhabit. And somewhere in the late evening quiet of the office, with the whiteboard covered in her notation and the old drafting table in the corner and the city doing its nighttime thing outside the window, Ethan had set down the drawing he was reviewing and said, "What did Dr. Voss say when you saw him last month?" She looked up. "How do you know I saw him?" "You had it on your calendar, the one on the office wall." He paused. "You didn't mention it. I didn't ask, but it's been 3 weeks. She looked at him, then she looked at the drawing in front of her. "He thinks I'm a candidate for the program," she said. "The rehab program you mentioned in March." She had mentioned it once, briefly, as a factual item, and had not returned to it. She had not expected him to retain it. She should have known by now that Ethan retained things. "Yes," she said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." "And?" She was quiet for a moment. The office held its late evening stillness, the hum of the heating system, the distant sound of the street. "I'm afraid," she said. She said it flatly, without the particular weight that would have accompanied it 6 months ago, but she said it, which was the part that mattered. "Of what specifically?" he said, not rushing to reassure her, just asking. "Of wanting it and having it fail," she said. "I've built something. We've built something that works, that functions. I know what I can do, and what I can do is enough. If I go into that program and it doesn't work, I have to come out the other side of it and rebuild my relationship with what I have. And I'm not sure I have enough left to do that again." He was quiet for a long moment. "Can I say something?" "You don't usually ask." "I'm asking this time." He looked at her steadily. "What you've built here, who you are at that table, what you do with a set of drawings and a problem nobody else has solved, none of that changes based on whether you walk or not. I want you to know that I know that, and that it's not the thing I'm thinking about when I think about you doing this program." She looked at him. "What I'm thinking," he said, "is that you spent 18 months telling yourself your career was over because it was easier than living in the uncertainty. And it wasn't over. And I wonder if this is the same thing." She held his gaze for a long time. She thought about the pilot light, about the 11 days, about Lily's drawing with the ramp that was part of the house, about the way she had walked into the auction fully prepared to watch everything end and had come home with a conversation she hadn't expected. "I'll call Dr. Voss tomorrow," she said. He nodded. He picked up his drawing and went back to reviewing it, and she went back to hers, and the office held its quiet, and she sat with the decision settling in her like something that had been waiting for a long time to land. The program was hard in ways she hadn't fully anticipated, and easier in one way she hadn't expected. The hard parts were physical, and they were also psychological, which she had understood intellectually and understood differently once she was inside the daily reality of it. The motor function work was slow and inconsistent, some days producing results that felt significant, and other days producing nothing. The nervous system doing what nervous systems did after the kind of damage hers had sustained, which was follow no reliable schedule and respond to no amount of will or effort on a predictable curve. There were sessions that left her exhausted and demoralized in a way that was different from ordinary exhaustion, a specific kind of depletion that came from trying very hard at something you couldn't fully control. She went 3 days a week and worked with a physical therapist named Marcus, a different Marcus, she noted privately, with the grim humor that had become one of her more reliable coping mechanisms, who was blunt and competent and did not celebrate incremental progress in ways she found performative. He noted it factually and moved to the next element of the session, which was exactly the approach she had asked him to take. The unexpected easier part was this. She had a life outside the program now, in a way she hadn't had a year ago. She went to the program, and the program was hard, and then she went to the office and did work she believed in. And she ate dinner at Ethan's house on Thursdays when the schedule allowed because Lily had decided Thursday was the logical day for this and had arranged it with a 7, now 8-year-old's blithe certainty that reasonable adults would accommodate a reasonable schedule. She worked on Lily's orthographic projection, and Lily worked with a patience for the technical that was unusual and a stubbornness about understanding it fully that was entirely unsurprising. She argued with Ethan about structural specifications for the second groundwork project, a small medical clinic in the western part of the city, and the argument was the genuine and practical kind that happened between people who were equally invested and equally certain, and it ended with a solution neither of them had started with, which was how their arguments generally ended. She was not okay every day. That was the thing she had learned to stop apologizing for internally, across the previous year. She had bad weeks in the program, and she had days in the office where the work was harder than usual, and she had nights in the Sycamore Street apartment looking at the parking lot where the weight of everything was Dale Pritchard's daughter, the auction lawn, the conference room where Marcus had said operational continuity 4 times, settled on her in ways she couldn't reason her way out of. She had gotten better at sitting with those nights instead of fighting them. She had gotten better at knowing they were nights, not permanent conditions. She called Dana more regularly. She kept her therapy appointments instead of canceling them when the week got complicated. She was, imperfectly and inconsistently and without any of the resolution that the word healing implied, trying. The community center opened on a Saturday in November, 14 months after Sylvia Okafor had sat across a conference table and said she needed a building where nobody felt like an afterthought. Sylvia had wanted a ribbon cutting, and Ethan had said yes before Claire could weigh in, which she noted but did not contest because she understood now that some things needed ceremony even when ceremony was not her natural register. The ceremony was modest, a small crowd in the parking lot, a ribbon made from the same orange as the nonprofit's logo, a brief speech from Sylvia that was practical and genuine and did not overstate what the building was or what it would do. Then the doors opened and people went in. That was the part Claire had not prepared herself for adequately. She had been in the building dozens of times during construction. She had walked, rolled, every corridor, measured every threshold, reviewed every detail. She knew the building the way you knew something you had made. Not just its surfaces, but its structure, the reasoning inside every decision. She thought she knew what it would look like occupied. She had not fully accounted for what it would look like with a woman in a power wheelchair navigating the main corridor without slowing down, without adjusting, without performing the small, ongoing negotiations with an obstacle course that Claire had been performing in every building she entered for the past 2 years. The woman moved through the space the way you moved through a space that was made for you, because it was. And she turned into the main assembly hall and stopped and looked at the clerestory windows above the far wall and the light coming through them and didn't say anything, just looked. Claire watched this from the corridor entrance. Ethan appeared beside her. He had been talking to Calvin, who had crewed the community center build and was accepting congratulations with the mild embarrassment of a man who considered the work its own sufficient acknowledgement. He came to stand next to her and looked at what she was looking at. The woman in the power chair, the light, the hall. "That's what it's for," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. They stood there for a moment. "How's the program going, Tim?" he said. He asked her this regularly in the same tone he used to ask about the clinic design or the permit timeline, as a genuine question, not a check-in about her emotional state. "This week was better," she said. "Voss thinks the left side response is improving. It's slow." "Slow is okay." "Slow is what it is," she said. "I've stopped having opinions about the pace." "That took a while." "Yes," she said. "It did." Lily found them 20 minutes later, having spent the interval exploring the building with the systematic attention she brought to new spaces, opening every door she was allowed to open, measuring things with her hands in the way she had learned from watching Claire, pacing distances and looking at ceiling heights and checking the light from different angles. She arrived at their side with her coat slightly askew and an expression of consolidated judgment. "The bathroom turning radius is better than the one at the doctor's office near school," she said. "That's a low bar," Claire said. "I know, but it's better, and the windows in the meeting room are the right height." She paused. "I think the sign by the east entrance is too high, though." Claire looked at Ethan. "She's right," he said. "I noticed it last week. We're correcting it Tuesday." Lily looked satisfied and straightened her coat. "Can we get food? Mrs. Okafor said there's food inside." "Go ahead," Ethan said. "We'll be right there." Lily went. They watched her move through the lobby, past the corrected vestibule and the reconfigured accessible route and the properly graded threshold, with the unself-conscious ease of a child in a space that was working correctly, which was the whole point, and also, right now, a thing that was hard to look at without feeling something. "I want to show you something," Claire said. She pulled out her phone. She had been carrying the images for 3 weeks, deciding when to show them. She opened the photo folder and held the phone toward him. The photos were from a session 2 weeks earlier. Dr. Voss had captured them without making a production of it, a series of images from a moment partway through the session when something had happened that neither of them had been expecting on that particular day. They showed Claire at the parallel bars, both hands on the rails, the physical therapist positioned to the left, and she was standing, not sitting in the wheelchair, not approximating a standing position. Standing, with the rails taking most of the weight, but her legs finding something in the signal chain that had been interrupted for 2 years, some partial and tentative and entirely real response. She was standing. The last photo in the series showed her face, not triumphant, not the way people expected you to look in a moment like that. She looked startled. She looked like someone who had stopped expecting something to happen, and then it happened, and the face hadn't caught up with the fact yet. Ethan looked at the photos for a long time. He scrolled through them slowly, all the way to the last one, the face. He looked at that one the longest. When he looked up, his eyes were not quite dry. He didn't do anything about that, didn't look away, or make a comment, or use the moment to compose himself. He just let it be there and looked at her. "Claire," he said, "it's not... Voss is very clear that it doesn't indicate a trajectory. It's one session. The nervous system is unpredictable, and what happened that day might not happen again, or might happen again differently, or might eventually... Claire." She stopped. "I'm not celebrating because you stood up," he said. "I'm celebrating because you walked into a program you were afraid of, and you showed up 3 days a week, even when it was hard, and you didn't let the fear of it not working keep you from trying. That's what I'm looking at." She was quiet. The sound of the community center opening carried through the lobby behind them. Voices, someone laughing, the sound of a room being used by people who needed it. "It was 4 seconds, she said. "I stood up for approximately 4 seconds. "That's 4 more than you had before," he said. She looked at him. She thought about the drafting table, and the $215, and a little girl saying it looked lonely, and the cascading, improbable chain of events that had assembled itself out of those elements into this moment, this building, this life, that was neither what she had planned, nor what she would have chosen, and was, in ways she was still learning to recognize, more hers than anything she had built before the accident. There was a version of this story where the moral was simple. She lost everything and found something better. But that version wasn't honest, and she had no patience for the dishonest version. She hadn't found something better. She had lost things that were genuinely worth having: her company, her mobility, 2 years of her 30s, the uncomplicated relationship with her own body that she had taken for granted every day of her life before the fall. Those losses were real, and they were permanent, and some mornings they still sat on her chest like something physical. What she had found was something else. Not a replacement. Not a consolation prize framed as a gift. What she had found was the specific and unglamorous truth that the capacity to rebuild was not a talent you discovered about yourself in a crisis, but a choice you made, daily, imperfectly, in the small and ordinary minutes. Filing documents when you were afraid the case would fail, correcting a vestibule width because it was right even when nobody would praise you for it, calling your attorney instead of lying on the floor, sending the drawings anyway, showing up to the program on the days when showing up felt like the hardest thing. She had also found, which she had not expected and could not have planned for, that it was easier to make those choices when someone knew which dates mattered and showed up at 7:45 without being asked and didn't look at you differently when the ground shifted. "I want to go in," she said, "to the opening." "Let's go in," he said. They went in together, through the lobby of the building she had designed and he had built, through the corrected vestibule and the properly graded threshold, and the entry that had been made for everyone who would ever use it, and the sound of the room opened around them. Voices and warmth, and a building being what it was built to be out. In the office on Clement Street, in the corner where the light was good, the old drafting table stood with its mismatched leg and its scarred surface and the accumulated ghost marks of every line that had ever been traced across it. Lily's drawing was pinned to the wall above it. The three figures, the house, the ramp that was part of the design and not an afterthought, the two uneven braids rendered in faithful detail. Below the drawing, in the small and precise handwriting that appeared in every set of drawings Groundwork produced, Claire had written a single line on a piece of drafting paper and taped it to the table's surface where she would see it every morning. The line was not a motto. It was not an affirmation. It was a note to herself, the way she made notes on drawings, functional, specific, a reminder of what the element was for. It said, "Every person who enters this building deserves to have it work for them." She had written it the first morning in the new office, before the furniture was fully in, when it was still just a room with a whiteboard and a table and a lot of work ahead. She had looked at it then, the same way she looked at it now, coming in on a Monday morning with the November light coming through the window and the city doing its early week thing outside, and a clinic design on the schedule, and a rehabilitation session on Wednesday, and Lily's orthographic projection homework waiting on the corner of the desk where she'd left it Friday. It was not a perfect life. It was in almost every specific detail more complicated than the life she had lost. But complexity was not the same as damage, and she had learned, slowly, stubbornly, on a schedule nobody had set for her, to tell the difference. She hung up her coat. She moved to the table. She uncapped her pen. She began,